So folks, welcome to the afternoon session on day 3. We have a really nice panel ahead. We're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to get straight into it. My name is Gautam Bhan, and I teach here at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. Okay, so our panel today is called Shifting Urban Realities. We have 5 papers, 12 minutes each. Small housekeeping rules for those of you online, welcome. Questions will be taken at the end of the plenary for all speakers. Feel free to use the Q&A box at any time in the middle to put in your questions. Don't use the chat, just use the Q&A box, okay? So I'll say that again. Avoid the chat, use the Q&A box. Online speakers, watch the chat for your time limits and your time warnings as you're speaking. I'll request all speakers to try and stick to time, just because I think a lot of the good stuff happens in the Q&A and we don't want to squeeze that out at the end, yeah? We'll go in the order of the program, and we have 2 speakers in person and 3 of the papers are online. So our first paper is We Don't Know, We Don't Care, the production of castelessness in Bengaluru's gated communities by Stuti Mehta of the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. Stuti?
It's on. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here after lunch. Like many of my colleagues here, I'm presenting a paper for the first time, so I apologize in advance for any errors and for going over time. I'm also very keen to hear your thoughts because I really want to know how I can take this research forward, so I'm looking forward to that. Over the next 10 minutes, I will be contextualizing my research and the site briefly before outlining some of the major arguments that I am developing in the paper. I'll also spend a minute on methods, because what sort of anthropologist would I be if I didn't agonize over the method? So this is my paper, We Don't Know, We Don't Care. This comes from a direct quote from one of my interviews, which I think kind of sums up people's approach to gated communities and caste privilege very effectively. So the proliferation of gated communities in Bangalore has received some attention over the last couple of decades. While some regard it mainly as a response to the reverse brain drain in context of the IT boom that brought NRIs and expats here, gated communities are also criticized as a bit of a menace that isolate residents and eat up public space. So work on gated communities in other parts of the world have highlighted the role of security and the talk of crime, and also the aspiration for a good life as reasons for the popularity of this spatial form. So as for the methodology, I conducted a 4-month ethnography at home, which came with its own set of opportunities and challenges. On one hand, I had nearly unrestricted access to all the people and spaces in the community, which is hitherto unprecedented in studies on gated communities as far as I can tell. But on the other hand, I was restricted by these very personal connections that facilitated my access. There were also concerns about the extent to which I could report on private conversations, and also felt that I couldn't access the productive spaces inhabited by workers without it being transgressive. Yeah, so just a quick context. This community consists of 149 villas. The built form is very reminiscent of an American suburb with red roofs and white stucco walls. The resident body comprises of migrants, and they talk about the diversity of the white-collar workers that exist here, about how they're from different states, different parts of the country, how they've come from like different engagements with abroad, as they say. And of course, the income level is all necessarily, people who can afford to have a place in such a space. So that's, yeah. So as for my literature, I looked at literature on gated communities and enclaves. So we have Setalo, Teresa Caldera. We have literature on changing caste relations, Anand Teltumre. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to leave it up there for a second. So gated communities, changing caste relations, castelessness and merit, imaginations of space and the environment, and elites and studying up, which is kind of, I think it really needs to be done more in anthropology. But yeah, so most of my work revolves around this theoretical framework of castelessness. From Satish Deshpande, I draw a lot of my ideas. Yeah, so my main arguments are a logic of privilege that I found emerging at this site, which includes nationalization of inequality, the idea of merit, and also the notion of comfort, which governs a lot of the decisions that people make here. Second argument is why caste and not only class is the reason for gating. And the final one is how gated communities emerge as a distinct spatio-cultural form. So this is just to give you a sense of some of my fieldwork. These are the emergent themes that came up in my interviews and interactions. So one is safety and security. The other is aspiration and ideal. Another is space. And finally, we have the notion of the other, which came about a little obliquely, but also very strongly in the interactions. So for the first argument, we have the logic of privilege. So there was this sense that inequality is essentially a natural thing. There's nothing we can do about it. One of my respondents spoke about how it's God's way of creating the universe, and how even though she does a lot of charity work and helps her domestic workers financially, there will come a time when even the next generation, who's very woke, will learn how this is just a way of the world. The next one is merit. So the idea that we've worked very hard to be here and we deserve to be here. And also this notion, I think, of the talk of excellence. So it is because that we are excellent and we've excelled at what we do that we deserve to be here. This stands as a bit of a response to Caldera's talk of crime, where she talks about the talk of crime as the reason for people wanting to separate from the outside. For me, is the talk of excellence over here. Finally, comfort is a big part of this logic. So people who've migrated back from abroad talk about how, it's like a little piece of the West in India, this particular gated community. And, but it's better over here because here we have maids. So that notion of comfort becomes very important in the decision to be there. Then when one of my conversations, I brought up this idea of how you go for a fancy lunch and you spend 4K for one meal for a family of 3 or 4. And, we were talking about redistribution and things like that. It was not a good conversation. But essentially, what the response from the person was that, ये सब तो ठीक है, हम अपना पेट क्यों काटें? Why should we cut our own, literally, why should we cut our own stomachs in order to facilitate access to other people? Now just for a brief view into the theoretical framework, castelessness. So castelessness is the notion according to which the so-called upper castes believe that they have transcended caste in some way. And Deshpande traces the genealogy of this notion through various contestations around caste at the scale of the nation. Caste society was regarded as being incompatible with the modern republic that India hoped to become. And this resulted in a tendency for caste blindness, which existed in parallel with the more sensible sort of recognition of the fact that caste-based disadvantage needed to be addressed frontally. Effectively, the coexistence of these opposing tendencies translated into an asymmetry of visibility, where Dalit Bahajan folk had to lean into their caste identity to claim justice, while the so-called upper castes distanced themselves from the institution of caste and became the default citizen that could claim to be truly modern. So there are some basic principles that I tried to condense from this, is that of ambivalence, contradiction, caste as a visibility problem, and the resentment that results in upper castes. Now the next argument, why caste and not only class? So there were, I think gated community residents were quite accepting of their privileged status, but they kind of relegated it to the realm of class rather than caste. And they were like, yeah, we've kind of earned, we recognize the material disparity with the outside, but we've earned the right to be here, and people should just work harder to, earn better. But there were some hints of caste over here, which were around, as you can see, the delegation of labor, around how productive spaces within the community were kept hidden, and also the type of activities and interests that people had. So right from, their Bharatnatyam classes to conducting pujas and things like that. So I was scrambling a little bit to make sense of how this speaks to the reality of caste that I know that exists. As you can see, after going through my notes and the framework and things, I realized that it's about entitlement, but an insecure one. So the entitlement that comes from being upper caste, but also the insecurity of having to face that reality. I'll go more into that in the question and answers, I think. So the next one is gated community as a distinct spatio-cultural form, which is my final argument, where gating is essentially a solution to the gap between aspiration and reality. Wherein infrastructurally 2 out of 10 outside can be escaped by a 10 out of 10 inside, which is again a quote from an interview. Or even where the belief in one's own castelessness can be fortified against the onslaught of a reality where caste exists. So the gated community, to my mind, is an embodiment of this insecure entitlement, which is secured through physical gates and guards, and also discursively when people get defensive when asked about caste. Yeah, so just to conclude, I think my biggest takeaway from the project was how inextricably caste and class get tied in the city today. So despite residents' insistence to the contrary, it's impossible to talk about upward mobility without confronting caste, be it in the realm of the everyday or through discursive constructs like merit. Then we have the shifting caste relations, which are characterized increasingly by invisibilization and dismissal and the insecure entitlement that I was talking about. So I think the insecurity here comes not because people don't believe in their entitlement, but because they believe so hard in it that the outside becomes a little illegible in that sense. It is to escape the illegibility of the outside and establish firmer control over their lives that they choose to gate. Another factor contributing to insecurity is the questioning of their undisputed status as the sole inheritors of secular modernity historically. They feel that they have to give up some of their share with the historical context of the Mandal Commission and so on, which was a big part of the memory of my interviewees. So they wanted to protect against that sort of tendency. So yeah, and I think a big reflection of this insecurity is reflected in the caste composition of the gated community that I saw. They all consist entirely of upper castes and dominant castes, and I think that's because this insecurity is not shared by upwardly mobile Dalit Bahujan folk who don't have to contest with this idea of the reality being out there, versus the upper castes who comprise the gated community do have to contend with that every day, and that's kind of the gated community emerges as a solution to that. I think I'll end here. There's some more things to talk about, but maybe in the question answers. Thank you.
Pitch perfect on time. Thank you for that, Stuti. So the way I'm going to use my position as moderator is that at the end of each presentation, I'm going to leave you my question, which you can answer with the others later. So you can just sit with you, don't have to answer it now. So two small things for you, Stuti. One is I'd like to hear a little bit more on your methodological reflection on the ethnography of the elite, but also to see if there's a distinction between the ethnography of the elite and elite ethnography, right? Mm-hmm. And by which, you know what I mean. Okay. The second thing I wanted to think about, and I think your idea of this sense of insecurity is really interesting, especially in a sense of the gated community not being an assertion of claiming land, but a defensive retreat. It's an interesting switch. So I want to think a little bit about, borrowing, say, from Chan's presentation in the morning, about boundaries being certainly not as hard as they appear. So I want to think about the porosity of the boundary of the gated community, of the gate itself. So if this sense of insecurity is part of entitlement, and if the gated community is a spatial retreat as a defense, what would you imagine, I know it's not what you research, but what would you imagine the encounter with caste is outside the gated community? What is one retreating from, right? Because one would imagine that a lot of the residents of a community like this perhaps are also in more equally caste homogeneous workplaces, are in equally caste homogeneous social circles, in restaurants, in clubs, right? So I'm trying to think a little bit about what the retreat is from. And why is the encounter that causes insecurity not more generalized in what is a caste polity, right, in your words? So just to think a little bit about what is a retreat from, and is the spatial retreat a different negotiation, and are other kinds of negotiation happening when you confront caste outside the gated community itself? So just keep that with you, okay? Thank you very much. All right, let's go to our second paper, and we're online, and the second speaker is Conflict-Induced Urban Transitions, Pemba, Cabo Delgado, Mozambique, by Silvia Amaral, the Center for Studies of Africa and Development, and the University of Lisbon. So Silvia, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to share a little bit about my PhD research. So thank you so much for this opportunity. My communication today consists of 4 parts. And I would like to start by situating you within the context of armed conflict and urban transitions in northern Mozambique. So, in 2017, an armed insurgency erupted in the province of Cabo Delgado, which you can see here in this map, highlighted in blue. This violence erupted in the countryside of Cabo Delgado and spread throughout the conflict in the following years, and it's still ongoing today. You can see here the capital city, Pemba, and down here, it's the capital of the country of Mozambique, Maputo, which is roughly 2,500 kilometers away from Pemba. So at the peak of the violence in 2022, almost half of the population of the province was displaced because of this conflict. In the map, you can see the main occurrences of the conflict, and here it's the city of Pemba in the south of the province. So these are the limits of the province of Cabo Delgado. So now, with this background, I would like to briefly discuss the construct of conflict-induced urbanization and how it operates in small and intermediate African cities. In a nutshell, this construct expresses the acceleration of urbanization processes due to armed conflict, which causes sudden population influxes from the countryside to urban centers in search of refuge, and violent transitions from rural to urban lifestyles. These rapid changes affect the destination cities in their demography, their landscapes, infrastructure, environment, socialities, economies, and governance. And these impacts have implications for their sustainable development. These impacts are even felt deeper in small and intermediate cities because of their connection, their close connection to their hinterlands, the countryside. So now I would like to briefly present the case study that I conducted on the impacts of this conflict in the city of Pemba. So Pemba, the capital of Cabo Delgado, sits on a peninsula around the bay in the south of the province. It's the largest settlement, and it's classified as a secondary city in the urban system of Mozambique. Its history traces back to before the 19th century, and it's linked to colonialism, the independence, the civil war, and more recently, the discovery of oil and gas reservoirs off the coast of Cabo Delgado. At the peak of the displacement crisis of this conflict in 2022, the population of Pemba had doubled in comparison from just 5 years before. And displaced persons coming from the province had settling in all the neighborhoods of Pemba, as you can see in this map. So now, my own research rests on the methodology of participatory photography and cartography, using cell phone photographs and location pinning on online maps produced by the participants, using the technique of spatial elicitation during walking tours, and the technique of visual elicitation during interviews and focus groups, complemented by participant observation. The participants were diverse inhabitants of Pemba, and the project was based on a partnership with a local university. The collected data, both written and visual data, was analyzed through content coding and grounded theory, identifying the emerging key ideas and grouping them in main themes that relate to those dimensions of conflict-induced urbanization that I mentioned at the beginning. So the main findings confirm that indeed we are watching a new phase in the urbanization of Pemba, induced by this conflict, because the city became the main destination for displaced persons from all over the province. And we see that people who came from the northern coast, they arrived by boat and tended to settle in the city center, while people coming from the districts inland, they would arrive by road and tended to settle in the periphery. And people would be hosted by families or rent houses or self-built houses in courtyards or empty plots. In addition, we also see that fishers would tended to settle by the seaside, while traders and business people converged to the city center, and farmers would have more tendency to stay in the periphery and by the bay. So we see that the locations that people chose within the city were contingent to their origins, their occupations, and also which also determined their family links. Also in parallel, there was the emergence of this new humanitarian hub that occupied premium locations in the center and the seaside. So now these are the dimensions of conflict-induced urbanization that I mentioned at the beginning, but here they are ranked according to the decreased frequency by which they were identified in the data, which means decreased frequency by which they were mentioned by the participants. So we can understand that in Pemba, issues of urban governance and economy are the most significant impacts of the conflict, while humanitarian and environmental issues lay at the bottom of the concerns of the participants. So the theme of governance expresses the weight of urban management on daily life and the degree to which it's being affected by the conflict. Topics that were frequently mentioned by the participants include the individual and collective agency of both residents and displaced persons, issues of urban planning, and challenges related to the functioning of public services. The economic impacts of the conflict are consequent of the demographic growth and also interferences in the relationship between Pemba and the province and its countryside. And most of these impacts were felt in the networks of supply and trade, the opportunities for labor and employment, and the strategies for livelihoods. Then the theme of sociality expresses the intricacies of the social fabrics amidst the simultaneous disruption and reinforcement because of the conflict, which is expressed in the community networks, in cosmopolitan lifestyles, and in the links of kinship and religion. Then networked infrastructure, which has a vital role in the urban life and was frequently referred in what regards the impact of the conflict on the roads, services, on housing conditions, and the delivery of water, sanitation, and energy services. Then the theme of landscape appears frequently because of this historical interdependence between Pemba and the province of Cabo Delgado and how it is affected by the conflict, especially so in these urban-rural linkages, but also how the conflict is contributing to both urban densification and expansion due to population increase. Demography is a very visible impact of the conflict because of the changes of the urban population due to displacement and population increase, but also the heterogeneity and also the gender proportion of the inhabitants due to the majority of the IDPs being women and children. Then, on a parallel dimension, the arrival of international organizations for conflict relief affects the city in both positive and negative ways, or we would say constructive and destructive ways. First, because of a community approach that improves public services and facilities, and also because of a rising aid industry that changes the landscape, the economy, and the sociality of the city. Finally, the theme of environment expresses the ripple effects of the challenges mentioned in urban governance and in infrastructure, mostly related to drainage, waste management, and health that are strained by the rapid population influx and the other stresses posed by the conflict. So, in conclusion, with this study seeks to show, hopefully it showed, the multifaceted transitions that an intermediate African city is undergoing due to armed conflict, and simultaneous challenges and opportunities that arise from this conflict for the urban inhabitants. The next step even final step of my PhD is to identify and understand how these transitions affect or constrain or they are potential for the sustainable development of the city by comparing the analyzed data with the literature and policy on sustainable urban development. These are my bibliographic references, and I thank you very much for your interest, and I welcome your comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Again, exactly on time, and I think thank you very much also for that paper, because I think particularly in this global moment, the relationship between conflict and urbanization is really one of the most empirically dominant modes in which cities are changing, but doesn't get the same kind of attention. So my questions that I'm going to leave for you for the end. The first one is also on method. You'll sense a pattern, folks on the panel. I'm very curious about the choice of thinking about visual and spatial elicitation, this idea of using methods that, and I'd love to hear a bit more about why you chose to pick a method so rooted in cultural aesthetics, particularly for a post-conflict society, where you would imagine there could be even psychologically and socially difficulty in thinking visually and culturally and socially, right? So I don't typically associate a post-conflict situation with something amenable to visual cultural self-representation. So I'm very curious about the method and how it went and why you chose it. And the second question I wanted to ask you was actually about, I think it's very intriguing that you said that the settling of the internally displaced people was both partly on whether they came from the north by the sea or the south, but that they settled by occupation as much as they did by region of origin. This is very striking to me because I think it creates a very different geography in Pemba. Right? Because what you actually have, the farmers in the province and the fishermen by the water, it's a very distinct pattern of migration that takes a kind of occupational sensibility. So I wanted to kind of ask a little bit about what you think that does to the form of Pemba that has resulted now. As it grows, it doesn't feel like a distinction I would call segregation. It feels like a more logical pattern of settling that has occupational advantages. So I was wondering about, and wondering about what it means for displaced folks to settle in that way. And also, finally, to get you to think a bit about the set of cognate terms that are next to what you're saying, right? So internally displaced people, migrant, citizen, resident, and refugee. Right? There's a way in which these terms are always leaking into each other. And I'm struck by the fact that we use this category of IDP for post-conflict because they're in the same nation state. But some of the questions that refugee studies ask are so vital here. What is the sense of insider, outsider? Is the displaced migrant Mozambican and a co-national citizen, or is it an other that has actually come in as an outsider to Pemba? So where do those lines of belonging and sociality sort of pick up? So, and I'd love to hear if you considered thinking about them actually as refugees and not so much as internally displaced people or migrants. And would it make a difference if we invoked that subjectivity instead of this one? So you can come back to that later, but thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to our third paper, which is called Disability, Poverty and Urban Transition, Experiences from India by Pankaj Kumar Soni of Banaras Hindu University.
Thank you. I think everyone listening me?
Yes, and we can see your screen. Go ahead.
Yeah, and my slide is visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. So basically, today I'm discussing about the disability, poverty and urban transition and experience from the India. And basically the presentation plan, I have to try to start how the matter conceptualized, and then I have to move for the conceptual framework. Then I have to move for the data source and methodology. Basically, I have some economics background, so I do work some data and what things. And then I have to come for the result and discussion. And finally, I have to come for the conclusion and way forward. And I try to cover your overall time period. Basically, I have getting already mail. Basically, that's actually 10 to 12 minutes. I try to cover all the things within the 10 to 12 minutes. Okay. So basically, I am talking about here the disability, and basically the question of the urban transition is very important. Current time, actually, we have to looking about the urban transition has actually the urban population increasing. And that urban population actually gone for the some type of the development and other things. Basically, we have to look about the urban transition in the three contexts. Basically, one of the employment and wage scenario, opportunity scenario. Second, we have to look about the employment and cost of the living scenario. And third, about the migration scenario. And all this context, the question of the disability is very important. Can that city is able to incorporate the disabled person? Can a lot of the plan start for the development purpose and a lot of the things going for? And that things actually comfortable for the disabled person or not? So basically my main motive to discuss about all these things. First, I have to try to conceptual framework for that things. First, I try to link between the disability and development. Then I have to move from the disability and poverty. And then I have to move about the disability and some international cooperation, basic coordination. Basically, disability movement come after 1980s, disability movements come in the force. And basically the 1981, the year of the disabled, and 1980 to 1990 is the decade of the disabled person. So now all the policy framework start the looking about that things. My country, India, is also looking at that things. 1995, they have to start about they have to pass the Equal Opportunity and Participation Act for the PWD. And now 2016, they have to pass the RPWD Act. And that actually make a mandatory to disability as a part of the policy documents. So basically, I have to move for that things. Basically, when I look about the India's experience, the policy framework actually classified in the three forms. First, we have to look about the rehabilitation-based policy. Actually, after India get independence in 1947, and after that, Planning Commission set up in the 1915. Planning Commission start the development process by the 5-year plan. Basically, and first 5-year plan, the disability is the concept joined with the rehabilitation policy. So basically, that type policy start with the rehabilitation-based policy. Then after the 1995, when Government of India passed the Equal Participation Act, and then we have to start about some social security perspective, that the disability is the part of the social security. Then I have to move about the 2016. Actually, that's an empowerment-based policy. Now, participation of the disabled is also important. So basically, I have to try to conceptualize all the things. Basically, that urban transition, the some key dimension for the urban transition, actually the population dynamics, economic restructuring, spatial transformation, environmental resource challenge, and social and cultural shift. That's actually important things for the development purpose. And population dynamics is also important. Population dynamics is too much important because basically in India, we have a two source of the, actually one source of the population is the census, and second things we have to source about the NSSO. NSSO actually National Sample Survey Organization present some type of the sample survey of the disabled person, and latest sample survey data published in 2016, 76 round of the data. And we have a census data in 2011 and 2001. Basically, disability come in the path of the census table in 1991 after the international coordination and other things. And the definition of the disability extended in the 2001 and 2011, we have to include almost the extended definition. So basically, population dynamics is also important because census actually give a picture that almost 2 to 3% population disabled people are existing in our India. But when you have to move about the when you have to move about the NSSO, that's actually also give almost the same figure, but the categorization of the disabled is the different. Census actually give that the visually person disability is the much more greater to compare to the other type of the disabled, but NSSO give the locomotor disability is the much more compared to the other type of the disability. That's another problem. Basically, different type of the disability, they have the different type of the accessibility. And accessibility is the main problem for the disabled person. Second thing about the economic restructuring. Economic restructuring, there is a lot of the policy designs come. And the policy designs, basically, they have to make a path of the disabled, but basically what is the basic constraint for the disabled? Actually, all the research and all the literature identify the disabled person is the low income, low illiterate, and it's out of the workforce population. Basically, policy restructuring is not considering as a potential way all the that things. That's actually main problem for the disabled. Basically, the urban periphery has start, and the urban periphery, they have to make a lot of the infrastructure projects. Suppose Delhi Metro is a good example, which have the disabled inclusive. But when we have to move about the some other type of the infrastructure, suppose railway station, and there is also challenge for the disabled person. Some type of the special transformation is also important. A special transformation in the sense that actually we have to not, sorry. A special transformation, that means the change of the urban boundary is too much important. Change of the urban boundary, that means urban boundary has increasing without the proper coordination of the other things. That's actually main problem. And also the densification of the core urban area. That's another problem for the disabled person. Basically, when you have to go for the, especially in the case of the India, the urban structure developed in the two sense. One, actually the very dense area, almost there is a very little passage about the disabled person. And suppose some type of the smart city concept, some type of the non-populated area, they have to develop the disabled person. So that's actually, transformation is also problem. Second also problem, the environmental and resource challenge. That's another problem for the disabled, but that's a problem with the water, energy and waste management. And also the green spatial and biodiversity is also problem for the disabled, how they have to access. And all these ways of the key dimension of the urban transition, I have to identify some things about the demand for the problem. And that demand for the problem, prevention of the disability, risk management and amelioration for the monetary and in-kind means that which the disability can be, how can be prevented. The intersection of the poverty and disability is also important. Basically, disability and poverty is a twin track relationship. Disability enhance the poverty problem and poverty enhance the disability problem. So basically it's a twin track relationship that's identified by the literature, and that's actually also address the demand side problem. And we have to also look about the role of the public policy like the employment and attitude and market structure is also important. And when we have to move about the supply side problem, that's actually accessibility, education, health, work and employment, and participation. Actually, I am looking about all this question on the basis of the some database, and that database I have to using already. I have mentioned that National Sample Survey, the 76 round for the disabled person, and actually it's a 26 schedule. That's the unit level data I have to extract it, and I have to use the 2001 and 2011 census for the some other information. So first thing about the accessibility, that means the accessibility of the public building. When I have to look about the accessibility of the public building, that data actually I have to extract it from the NSS 76 round, and that data actually show that the urban area almost 46.79% disabled person is facing a problem to accessibility of the public building, and almost 53.21% population are not access the public building. That's actually another problem. Second, about the accessibility about the public transport is also important data. Public transport, that means we have to find that almost 41.18% population, disabled person facing to problem regarding the non-ability of the ramps, not step and stairs regarding all the things. There is also problem regarding the no opening doors. Almost 3.76% are facing that type of the problem. No sitting bus stop station, almost 1.7%. No special toilet seat, almost they have to facing like 0.33%. And no, actually, that's actually another problem, accessibility problem. Now I have to move about the some education regarding data. That education regarding data, actually, disabled person has almost three types of the education. One of the, they have to join with the common school. Some, they have to join with the special school. And third, the education given at a home. Basically, disabled has a problem to moving and other things, so that's actually problem. Actually, that data show that the if any disabled person can be attend the preschool intervention, almost they have to say that 86.94% population are not attending any preschool intervention. And the same thing about the, is there enrolled about the ordinary school? Almost they have to find that they actually take almost 35 points, and almost 1/3 disabled are not a part of the ordinary school. Actually, the main problem with the disabled is another. Basically, in our country, yeah, of course, actually, I have to just summarize in the within the 2 and 3 minutes. So,
I'll give
basically, in our country, disabled actually face a any disabled person, if they want to a part of the government benefit and other type of the benefit, they have must be disabled certificate, and that disabled certificate more than 40%, now they are the eligible. Almost 2/3 population disabled people are the not facing that type of the same data for the status of the disabled worker in India, the same thing showing that. And disability actually also some type of the problem to losing the job after the disability. Disability is also accidental phenomena, and so people are the facing a problem after the disability, some type of the accidental phenomena. The people are going to disable, they have to facing some another type of the problem. Almost 50% people lose the job after the disability. So what type of the policy management for how to make the urban transition? So we have to make the urban transition some type of the social inclusion strategy, technological adoption, sustainable environment, and strengthening the urban governance. On the basis of the, I think actually 3-dimensional approach is the very important. The first dimension look about the discrimination, reasonable adjustment. The second dimension look about the disability standards and the public inquiries. and third dimension regarding the action plan and the code of the conducts. Okay, so I think
I'm going to stop you there, Pankaj.
thank you so much for the
Thank you.
questions and the things. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that, Pankaj. The question I'm going to leave for you to answer later is, on when you present something that is such multi-dimensional structural disadvantage, right? There's poverty, there's the built environment, there's education, there's protections. I just want to ask two things. Since you looked at this across time, what is the trend that you see in the numbers you're showing us, right? Are we in a trend where there is a beginning of incremental improvement in this access, right? Because you showed us that 50% did not have access. Has that number come to 50% in the last 10 years? So what is the trend in the movement of the numbers? Because that also helps us link to my second question, which is, where are we in the policy moment in India? Is it that attempts are now being made to implement these, or are we in a place where we have to fight to get attention for resources and time to go to questions of disability within planning? So I just want you to locate later where the question of disability policy is vis-a-vis a policy moment, right? So which stage of that process we're at. So you can come back to that in the question answer session. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Pankaj. Okay, folks, so our fourth paper. So we now have two papers from the mother city. So we go to Bombay. And are we changing the order? Yes, okay. Because that is the paper of the other one. Yes, that is right. Perfect. Okay. So, sorry, that photo was 5 minutes too early. Just hold on. Okay. All right. So, the first paper from Mumbai is called Invisible Agents, Mumbai's Transformation Through the Lens of the Wagri Community by Nishka Kumar, Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. Nishka, over to you.
Hi. Thank you for letting me present my paper in this panel. And before I begin, I want to thank the faculty of Center of Urban Policy and Governance, Tata Institute, and my master thesis guide, Dr. Ratula Kundu. So my paper is titled Invisible Agents, Mumbai's Transformation Through the Lens of Wagri Community. So to set a context, Chindi Kaka, that is working with second-hand clothes, has been the occupation done by a service nomadic tribe called Wagris for more than 90 years, from western to the northern India and present-day Pakistan as well. In cities, they are known as Bartanwalas because they give bartans in exchange of old clothes, and they carry bartan on their head, bartan as in vessels. So, but the story of Wagris is not just of an urban poor group resorting to vending, but about itinerancy being part of their identity. And I'll pose the same question I asked myself before the research, that what occurs when a nomadic group enters in an urban environment that is specifically made for sedentary population. I'll briefly go through my research methodology and objective. So this research explores various ways in which the Wagris have practiced their work in Mumbai, the impact of Mumbai's constant transformation on their practices, the influence of their identity as service nomads, as denotified tribes, the term I will not use because denotified itself has certain implications on their work, but and the effects of the Wagri community's labor on the city spaces. The presentation will focus on the latter two. The research methodology I followed was follow-along participant methodology, and I visited 18 bazaars and some of their homes. But it's very relevant to note that these are not all the Wagri markets that exist in Mumbai. There are many more Wagri markets, but because of their nature, they are they're so elusive in nature for a certain reason that I could not map all of them. So 18 bazaars were what I mapped. So coming down to the livelihood practice, I'll briefly explain what their practice is. It's divided into three parts. The first is procuring clothes. In procuring clothes, they go on a ferry. Ferry means they wander around neighborhoods and make a call, bartan wale, which leads to women specifically, largely women, coming out and asking them to come up, where they give them second-hand clothes. And through this, they procure clothes. Second part is the sorting. This sorting happens in various categories, festive, etc. And this sorting is happening under bridges, on pavements, in their homes itself. Their homes and many marketplaces are used as storage spaces. The Basti homes that I visited, they were lined with potlis outside, and every nook and corner that I could see was filled with potlis. And the third part is, of course, the market. So the Wagri markets I specifically refer to as Wagri markets because these markets are day markets. They can sit in these spaces the entire week, but what they do is they sit in particular market on a day, and then the next day they move to another completely different market in a completely different area. Moving on to how does the city affect them? Uh, Mumbai has been going through transformation, specifically visually, for more than 2 decades. A push was made to develop a similar strategy used to develop Shanghai and Singapore, of course, for Mumbai's future. In the global south, infrastructure is a dominant imaginary of progress. So, increasing towers, gated communities, and tall buildings are completely unfriendly to Wagri fairies. As one of the Wagri women said to me, that "6 माले तक मेरा आवाज नहीं जाता." So what ends up happening is that they have to cover more area and also resort to agents, which are old contacts, maids, watchmen, etc. And increasing surveillance makes it difficult for them to enter buildings and even certain localities. These ideals of world-class, violently sanitized places that are occupied by the urban poor. These beliefs are rooted in caste and class, but are articulated by the privileged under the guise of efficiency, legality, and aesthetics. For the Wagris, this prejudice is particularly detrimental as they continue to be perceived as the criminal tribe because of the Criminal Tribe Act 1871, which criminalized them as thugs, resulting in social marginalization, and with that, also migration from their hometowns to cities, which offered them anonymity. It was not until 1952 that the CTA was repealed. Even with the law overturned and having been in Mumbai for many generations, they are yet to be ridden of the stigma of being called thieves. Their livelihood practice is still considered decoy for stealing. Constant complaints to authorities about the markets because they are noisy, dirty, or disorderly or cause traffic. They are now being issued identity cards from societies and other groups. The use of identity card enables Wagri women to navigate the moral and legal distinction between chore and an honest worker. From the perspective of the state planner, this is for regularized aesthetic, order, and productivity and efficiency, which Gettner calls as rule by aesthetic. But through the lens of the Wagris, this becomes a huge problem as they are constantly shifting. The entire point of being a nomadic tribe is constantly changing. So they cannot use that ID card everywhere. And secondly, their relationship to the state has never been positive. It has constantly involved harassment of various kinds. So the Wagris are not looking at state as protectors, but as harassers. So that leads me to the next part of, are they just victims? A rapid changing city which tries very hard to push the poor out is not completely able to erase certain practices of livelihood, even if it does manage to make it difficult and precarious. This is because of the ingenuity and agency of the Wagris. James Scott, in his book The Art of Not Being Governed, argues that certain minority groups, using their culture and even their lack of writing system, put distance between themselves and the states that wish to engulf them. I argue that the day and temporary markets are a way to evade state surveillance. And not do they just evade state surveillance, they adapt, they speculate, coordinate, and consolidate information. From dangerous class, they have become quiet rebels. Public spaces are increasingly becoming the domain of the state power, which regulates their use, making them orderly. But Wagri's unusual and unimaginable active use of public space challenges these ideas of order of planners and municipalities. The passive network they have formed, because this is a very tight-knit group, established by a tacit recognition of their common identity, which is Wagri, which is nomadic tribe, is mediated through space, atomizes as soon as supposed threat is observed or need emerges. Wagris don't just reappropriate spaces for their work, but they're also making heterotopic space which allow entry to bodies that are considered quote unquote undesirable. This is not at all to say that bodies that enter these markets are undesirable, but trans women, sex workers, homeless, people suffering extreme poverty don't get entry even in street markets. Like a trans woman said to me, मैं यहाँ खरीदारी कर सकती हूँ, मैं कपड़े देख सकती हूँ और उन्हें छू सकती हूँ। मेरे कपड़े छूने पर मुझे भगाया नहीं जाता या उन्हें घिन नहीं आती. No one icks out when I touch those clothes. As another respondent said, I can find similar style clothes on street as well, but I go to a college when most people wear branded clothes. I know my parents can't afford these clothes, and I know rich people wear these clothes and give away. So I anyway use my sister's old clothes. I have no problem wearing second-hand clothes that look new and are branded. Another respondent, a Wagri man said, हमारे गांव में हम शहर में काम करते हैं वो चलता नहीं है क्योंकि हम किसी के भी हाथ से पानी पीते हैं और हमें मुसलमान और गटर साफ करने वाले लोग से के हाथ से पानी पीना मना है. पर ये तो शहर है, यहाँ थोड़ी ये सब दिखते हैं. They also become this bridge between the urban and rural, where they take clothes from the urban and sell it in these rural markets. A Wagri woman laughed and shared that she found it funny that her uncle, who lived in the village, was a daily wage worker at a farm, wore a vibrant blue t-shirt with English words written on it, like city people, where when he has never been to a city or gone to a school. In conclusion, I would just like to say, as urban surveillance intensifies and cityscapes undergo visual metamorphosis, it becomes imperative to scrutinize this invisibilization of the Wagri community's contribution to the city and how the cloak of invisibility itself makes them potential agents of urban change. Gidwani in 2006 coined the term suburban cosmopolitanism. The concept argues that circular migration bring in exchange of thoughts, aspiration, and material form of modernity. He further speaks about the migration to urban spaces and desire for anonymity, also demands them to be accepting of different cultures and even if not intentional, become coded in their everyday interaction. I'm careful to not romanticize this non-elite form of cosmopolitanism as I recognize they themselves also bear traces of prejudice, but I still insist on the capacity of the urban poor and specifically Wagris and nomadic tribes to create inclusive spaces. It is within the realm of the everyday that the potential for transformative action and opposition resides. This study seeks to provide a distinct and nuanced perspective on the marginal spaces within urban environments, illuminating both the constraining and oppressive nature of the cultural exclusion, as well as the creative possibility it inherently has. The concept of the periphery is typically understood in relation to the center. The topic of the panel is shifting urban realities. So similar to how wildflowers demonstrate resilience by flourishing in unexpected and harsh conditions, the findings show and demand is to understand the margin as its own knowledge system rather than as reference to the center, rendering the center irrelevant. Thank you.
Thanks, Nishka. Thanks for staying on time. So the question I want to leave you with is just to push you a little bit on this idea. The agency certainly is well accepted, right? But I want to understand a bit if your research can also help us understand what this agency is being wielded towards by the Wagri community. At some point, you said that as a nomadic tribe, what is essential to them is a sense of mobility, right? So the question then also comes, what is the claim they want to make on the city, if any claim at all? So a claim to mobility is distinct from a claim to a certain spatial presence or residence or belonging, right? So the question also is that what is the direction that you can share with us that, because while the center's knowledge system may be distinct from the peripheral knowledge system, the center's material and legal power you yourself are describing, right? So I want to also say that the tension here is that in moments, perhaps even momentarily, the choice of the Wagri community is to make themselves legible to the state or to the RWA guard or to the society for a certain access, but not make it legible for anything else, right? So the question then is, what's the claim? what is the claim being made to this city in a time of transition by a community defined by its mobility, right? And then it becomes possibly another way to imagine a relationship with the state, which is not just protector or harasser, which are two very binary ways to look at the state, right? So if you draw, say, a parallel between what feminist studies told us about the family, where the father is both protector yet controller, right? Those categories are not distinct, they're simultaneous. The state is always both protector and harasser, not just of the Wagris, but also of you and me. So when we think a little bit about that, what is it that you see as the futurity of that agency? What is the claim being made? What kind of space is trying to be opened? And what are the claims not being made? Right? There is a distinction between the Wagris and, say, the Kolivadas that we're going to hear about now. They're different claims. So it'll be lovely to hear a bit more about that. But thanks so much for that paper. Okay, so our final paper for this session is by Neha Sunil Rane, Harshali Ghule, who are online, and Priyanka Akkar, who is in person. And the paper is titled Kolivadas Between Land and Sea, Transitioning Lives of Coastal Urban Villages in Mumbai. Over to you.
Over to you. Hi, hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Hello everyone, hi, I'm Harshali and I'll be presenting this work with Neha and Priyanka. The work is a project which was emerged when Priyanka and Neha were working on cooperatives, fishing cooperatives in Mumbai. So today's work is on Kolivadas between land and sea, transitioning lives of coastal urban villages in Mumbai. So here, background picture, you can just see that it's taken by one of our friends, Shubham. It's Varali, and you can just see that the background of high rises and the Varali port, where you can just see these boats are parked there. So here we are using two aspect of land and sea to understand. Neha, next slide, please. So here we are using two aspect of land and sea because to situate it or to understand a coastal urban village as a separate category for settlement like Kolivadas, which are trapped between land and sea in context of ongoing urban transition in the cities are located on the coast. So here when we are seeing like coastal urban villages like Kolivada, because when the occupation and location are changing, their understanding of land is also changing, because these are traditional fishing communities who are completely depend on the sea for their livelihood. As their livelihood change, as their occupation change, their understanding of land and the relationship with that land also changed, and we are trying to trace throughout that. Next slide. So here, when we are talking about urban villages in India, we all know that the category of urban villages in academia is taken as like villages within the urban, or urban villages is like former rural villages which are enveloped by the formal city and which are still retaining distinct social morphological characteristics. And there is a lot of literature in Delhi, Gurgaon, and Noida, on Gurgaon and Noida. So when we are talking about urban villages which are on the periphery of big cities or metropolis, so where the acquisition and urbanization are initiated in the process of agrarian economy. So where the agrarian land are being acquired and then transitioning happening because the agrarian communities are also changing. So where at least the land dominant caste are getting benefit of that, and they are moving into the urban economy and the capital accumulation is happening, and that where rural and urban is co-constituting. But here in the context of Mumbai, these urban villages are always considered as Gauthan or Kolivadas. And recently, there are cases when these are in the last development plan, those were either considered as a commercial zone or residential zone, as and then this settlement previously were classified as a slum. So there are no demands from the communities that in these villages to have these Gauthan and Kolivadas marked separately in the plan and treat them differently. Here we also try to understand what do they mean differently, because when Kolivadas and Gauthan are already marked, not all urban villages are Kolivadas, not all Gauthans are and not all Kolivadas have their Gauthan. So in this very complex transition process, we try to understand why the coastal urban villages need to see as a separate category when we study them. Next slide. So why coastal urban villages? As I mentioned, that we are trying to trace two important aspects. One is location and second is occupation. As for fishing communities, their primary source of livelihood was sea. They were always dependent on sea, so they never see land as a significant capital, and the coastal common were always for a use purpose. So they used to have some common land for fish drying ground, boat maintenance and the parking yard stock, but the land was always preserved by community as a common land. And of course, when the CRZ came, and it gave them protection, but their struggle is for right. And now we are trying to understand, as their relation with sea is changing, as their relation with their occupation is changing, how their struggle for right, how their struggle for the land is increasing. Next slide. So here, when we are understanding why they are now demanding to label their settlement as a Gaon, because we observe that there are a Gram Vikas Samiti, there are their local structure, there is a patil for them, and very cohesive, homogeneous structure. So in that, when the vocabulary is used as a Gaon and Gauthan, why they want bureaucracy also to use this same term and give them that status? Because unlike other peripheral urban villages, the Koliwadas are always situated at the heart of Mumbai, and those are preserved by many generations despite of Mumbai's fast-paced global urbanization. Koliwadas are the native settlement of the original inhabitants of the Mumbai. They have managed to retain their main occupation based on and inseparable from the coast and sea, which is indifferent from the land-based occupation of conventional urban villages. So it's not like that their agrarian land will get acquire, or it will get transformed, and then they will get benefit of that, and they will use that. So because of that, this distinction between their Koliwadas and urban villages, and when we are trying to see it in the context of Mumbai, this idea is very ambivalent. And even in the academic term, we try to locate this theoretical idea is a very administrative construct that is often even borrowed by many, borrowed by bureaucratic in bureaucracy and even on the plan, and which is very distinct from the realities on the ground. And through this, we use 3 case studies that Neha will explain further.
Thank you, Harshali. So I'll just quickly go through the methodology and field side. It was extensively qualitative ethnographic research, and we traced oral histories, memories, and lived experiences of the community in these 4 field sites. As you can see, all our field sites are dispersed across the coast of Mumbai, starting from the southernmost tip to the northern Bhati Gaon. So first I'll talk about a case of Worry. So Worry is a very known Kodiwada in the sense it has always stayed in news for its struggles and identity and culture. So the people of Worry, the people we spoke to, had a sense of belonging to the city and the coast. So there was this sense of the right to ownership of the city as well as the land. And they've always constantly negotiated with the state through litigation. So during our interview, the respondent mentioned to us that like their first case for their land right was filed. They started working towards collecting documents in 1960s. So there was always this sense of safeguarding land right in case of Worry that we found very unique or different in this case. And so the 457 families which claim to be the original inhabitants of the this particular coastal village have secured their land tenure land right, sorry, and they'll soon be receiving decree, and this will be the first Kodiwada in the city to have such right. So that is what separates them from the other Kodiwadas in the sense of land right. And where if we have to trace this also comes from their location. So if I can show you on the map, they are perfectly located on the southern central coast of the city. So they have seen the city around them change over the years, in pre-colonial and post-colonial, post-independence time, especially with what happens to the mill, textile mills in Mumbai, and they were closely associated with the people who worked there. So that also triggered the sense of urgency for them to secure their land rights. And so now their main demand is to get these land rights, and along with that, they also want to have rights over commons, so they can continue practicing fishing. And their inclination is more towards redevelopment with the help of a private builder. That's at least what emerged from our initial probing. They have this sense of loss also that has already triggered, where they are saying they because of the influx of migrants, in the encroached areas around the Kodivada, they'll be reduced in numbers. So that is what they are already talking about. Now I'll quickly go through the Warsaw case. Warsaw is very synonymous. It's with its food culture and the festivals that they celebrate. And their oral history, we could trace back to their first litigation was filed in 1918 to have right to practice their community rights in the temple. And as Shali also mentioned earlier, that they have a very cohesive and homogeneous culture, but due to the reclamation that happened in and around Malad and Andheri area, that triggered a lot of ecological changes, and that's what they pinned down as a reason for loss in their livelihood, especially reduction in fishing income. So that's what that's as a result we see a lot of rentier economy there. And this poster is exactly displaying that they've been warned to be sure of, and of who they are keeping as a tenant. Yeah. So this respondent here is also highlighting how they neglected their land rights and how they are facing the consequences of it through the loss of livelihood and their dependency on rentier economy. The last case I'll be covering is Cuff Parade. Cuff Parade is a fairly new Kodivada, and it's a very unique case, as in the Kodivada was settled here because as an act of resistance to stop reclamation from happening on this specific coast, and to continue with their access to the sea. So it's yeah. So this is they have already, they are in the process of securing their land right, and this is the formula that they've come up with, where K will stand represent their individual house right, and then they'll have also common rights over commons, and they also want additional land as an option for coastal community to purchase those land plots if they can afford, and if they think their family needs that to stay there. And extension, so, and they want intergenerational right over that land, so they want additional land to access that intergenerational right to inhabit that area. So yeah, now Priyanka will talk about Bhati. Priyanka.
Bhati Koivada was separated from Mud roughly 100 years ago. They came at this place, secured the status of Gauthan, and they are a thriving fishing community as opposed to the earlier Koivadas we presented. What Bhati already has the status of Gauthan, and what they want more is rights over coastal commons. By coastal commons, they mean the land that has been used for fish drying, boat parking, etc., and also their customary rights over the sea. By customary rights over sea, I mean These fishers have inherited spots in the sea to lay nets called as COP. These spots are being recorded through geotagging to establish their claim under Fisheries Department. So Bhatti wants all these three things: Gauthan, coastal commons on land and on sea.
Priyanka, can you just conclude in a minute or so?
So from all these case studies, one thing that we have realized is the recurring demand for coastal commons essential for practicing livelihood as well as the residential spaces. Because of the ecological degradation, the fishing has been declining, but the bureaucratic landward planning is also posing threat to the Kolivada because the scope to practice the occupation gets reduced. Because of these findings, we feel that the classification of Kolivadas as coastal urban village is necessary, especially in context of the transition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so folks, I'm going to leave my question for this team. I'll ask you to think of yours. I'll open to the floor in just a minute. And folks online, now is the time to put your questions, if you have, into the Q&A box as well. So folks, thank you for that. I want to sort of, I'm intrigued by this idea of, there are two things I would like you to reflect a bit more about. One is, Mumbai's urban fabric has been largely governed by a technology of redevelopment throughout both inland and the coast. And so when you think about the question of transition, this has been the dominant mode of the production of space for some time in the city. And it seems to me that in a way, what you're telling us is actually the most effective resistance to redevelopment has happened in the Kolivadas. If you take the slums, if you take the inner city, if you take the mill lands, if you take the East Coast slums, none of them actually have been able to negotiate this kind of sustenance, make claims to commons. So I'm partly also thinking about, are we looking at the Kolivadas almost as a kind of, what's the relation between similar claims that are not coastal, not Bhumiputra, not Kolivada, not original inhabitant, right? There's a kind of power to these claims that I think I would like to hear a little bit more about, and I wonder about the porosity between the slum that is not the Kolivada, right? And that is not the Gauthan. Because when I think of this demand, I think it's very interesting to see a political movement demand an inclusion in the plan. Typically, the slum and the informal settlement has always been in tension with the plan. And this idea that the development plan should have a specific category is an interesting notion, right? So it goes back to Nishka's point about saying, if the state is both protector and harasser, this is you going to the state who is trying to evict you and saying, actually put me in your law. There's this contradiction. It's that care and control dialectic again. So I want to just hear a little bit more about this relationality between, because if Kolivada has become coastal urban villages, there's a weird way in which they're also saying, we are not the basti. We are not the slum, right? And I want to just think about also, then you're creating layers of citizenship and gradation in a way. This doesn't make it what they're doing wrong, but I'm saying there's also an unintentional creation of other layers of belonging. Because if you're original, then everyone else isn't, right? And then you create the category of the migrant as well. So just a reflection on this, on the reflections of Kolivada politics on other settlements in the city, and to this interesting sense of a community under threat by the law seeking inclusion in the formal plan in this category, and where the faith in this planning category suddenly comes from, in a place where we have always been told not to take planning so seriously, right? This is the Global South. So, but thank you so much for that work. Okay, so I'm going to take questions together. I'm happy to read some of them online. And then panelists, I'm going to come back to you one by one, because you have my question with you at least to answer. So floor's open. Yeah, so let's start. Can I start with Namita for a second? I'll just come back to you. Yeah? It doesn't matter. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so my first question was for Stuti. So I was curious to know what were the kind of religious identities in the gated community, and whether there were insecurities within the gated community related to such identities. And my second question was to Priyanka, Harshali and Neha. So in the context of the coastal road, which is sort of disrupting the relation of fishers from the land to the sea, we have seen, do you see any difference between the resistances in Worli, which has sort of seen the Bandra Worli sea link now for past maybe 15 years or more, as compared to Warsaw and Mud, which is now going to face that with the coastal road coming up? So do you see any differences between these two fishing colonies? Thanks.
Thank you. Pass the mic to your right, Namrita. And thank you for giving your question brief. Yeah.
Hi. Guys, this is for the last presentation. Hi, Priyanka. So this is an interesting way of thinking about the Koliwadas and the Gautans, because if you read the 2015 report, they have been called urban villages. It's not that what do you want from that planning category of the urban village, which is distinct from what has already been offered for it? It is already something which is treated differently, mainly because of the way in which the land ownership patterns happen in that area are very distinctly different from the way in which they happen throughout the rest of the city, right? So when you say urban villages, what exactly are you all asking for in that category which is not already present, or how does it differ from what is already present?
Thank you. Anyone else on the floor? Yeah, can I take a mic back there?
Hi, my question is to Suti. I wanted to ask if there are any market differences in the responses gathered from younger or young adult populations in the gated communities, whether it's about the way they perceive their surrounding or their relation to the blue-collar workers. And please ignore if this is not part of the scope of the study.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to close. Perfect. All right, let's take a round through. Shall we, let's go in order itself. So, Stuti, you want to go first?
Okay, so I'll try to respond to your questions first. The reflection on the methodology, ethnography of the elite versus elite ethnography. So this, in many ways, was precisely why I wanted to do this project. It was a response to sort of the tendency within anthropology to study the other. And another, so this category of the other has obviously gone through multiple changes over time. It's gone from the noble savage to the suffering slot, everything. But this in particular was, and also it was an anthropology at home. So it was not only turning the gaze upwards, but also reversing the gaze and looking inwards. And I think one of the big sort of potential of that was that, by studying at home, you are not restricted to your time on the field. You can draw on insights from earlier. You can continue to stay in touch with people in a very personal capacity. Then, of course, another reason why I wanted to talk about the elite part in particular was that whenever we talk about inequality, we're always looking at one part of it, and that's the hypervisibility problem that we talk about in studies on caste as well. So why is it that we cannot produce, as Deshpande has said, biographies of the general category in order to understand inequality in a much more holistic manner, especially since this is visually creating claims on space in the city. So that was the other sort of thing. What it means to do such a project was that I was faced with a lot of questions of why are you asking us this? What is the end relevance of, what is the contribution that you're going to be able to do? Because research was always framed as this contribution to society. So what will you get from studying us? Why don't you go out and study the slum instead? That sort of thing. And of course, there was a fair amount of suspicion and discomfort also. The other question, what exactly are they retreating from? That is tricky because it is difficult to, so my field sort of comprised of this casteless elite people whose imagination was insulated from caste in a sense, or from being able to see caste. So I think, as one of my co-panelists was talking about, it is these moments, you have to find cognates of caste in the city, I think. And, we have the world-class city, and that's related to Amita Bhaviskar's idea of bourgeois environmentalism, and how that speaks to needing to retreat away in order to go away from what is illegible. That was that. And, coming to the, I think that's all that I can answer with that. But the religious identities question, so yes, it was a largely upper caste Hindu place. There were a few people, like one person I spoke to who was Christian, 2 people I spoke to were Muslim. They were like, it was also a complicated moment because my fieldwork was right before the Ram Janmabhoomi Ayodhya temple thing, and the Hindutva fervor had reached a kind of fever pitch at that time. So there was a very surprising element of my research actually, because again, like I've grown up there, so historically I've seen that this gated community does not care about a lot of outward religious whatever display. But at this time I was like, I cannot recognize the people over here because they're like going around and distributing the prasad from the temple and things like that. So I think at that point, the sort of other religious identities that I spoke to, they kind of doubled down. First of all, they didn't want to talk about religion, and otherwise they would double down on this sort of idea of secular modernity, and they would look at this Hindutva movement as an aberration in what was otherwise like a trajectory of moving towards this secular identity of where religion doesn't matter sort of thing. Market disparities, I think so this is one of the older gated communities in Bangalore, so it very clearly speaks to this American suburban sort of aesthetic. But I think now gated communities look a little different, and the young like software engineers and things that you speak to, they will not focus so much maybe on the American aesthetic, but they will look at space, they will look at the size of the house, things like that. So I think that would be some element of change there.
And did you find any distinction between younger people? I think that
within
was part
the
of
gated
question.
community? They oddly did not care. They were like, I need my safe space, that's all. The built form, this thing, it wasn't a major part of their imagination. And they were like, yeah, and a major part for them, especially the residents of the gated community rather than younger people outside the gated community, inside the almost natural trajectory is to go abroad after finishing their education. So they really didn't care what's happening here.
Different kind of production. Yeah. Okay, Sylvia.
Yes, thank you very much for these questions. They allow me to expand a little bit on my presentation and to touch things that I chose to omit because I had to choose for the time. I will try to be brief because they are a bit deep, especially the first one regarding the method. So the choice of the method is rooted in my theoretical background, which tries to align with this southern turn in urban studies, this contemporary critique to mainstream urban studies that is rooted in a post-colonial and a decolonial lens that tries to look at cities all around the world as valid places of research, and to go outside or to decenter from westernized or Eurocentric approach to cities. And in that line, I based my research I tried to base my research in endogenous methodologies, and following this, to look at cities in a more holistic approach, not so quantitative, not so rational. Well, I put all of this, because all of these are labels, but we need labels to talk to express. And in order to be able to identify or to understand, to unpack a more qualitative characteristics, features of cities, then I chose these visual methods. So visual elicitation and spatial elicitation. And then this also connects to the matter of a post-conflict society. Well, it's still a conflict society because the conflict is still ongoing, even if it's not happening in the city. And also because the use of images and the use of space can be a more organic way to unpack information than questions, than conversations. So this was the first approach, to walk around the neighborhoods with the people in order for them to speak freely, and then on the second round to have a more structured interviews and focus groups. Then regarding the locations chosen by the IDPs and how this creates a geography of the city, I didn't mention questions of ethnicity and culture because I didn't have much time. But actually, Pemba is like a mirror of Cabo Delgado in the sense that the different ethnicities, and I could name just the main three, which are Moani, they are mostly Muslim and fisher people. And then you have Makua, which are mostly farmers. And then we have the Makonde, who come from the highlands, and they were mostly hunters and warriors. So the way that these communities have been coming to Pemba throughout their history already had an impact on their patients. Yeah. And the IDPs just follow these paths, let's say. Sure. So, of course, that now we have new, like middle class, we have the humanitarian hub, and these all juxtaposes. But the geography that were already existing in Pemba was not radically changed by the income of the IDPs, which connects to the last question regarding the labels that we use for the people. So these IDPs and, displaced persons, newcomers, they are family, they are friends from the people who live in Pemba. So in Pemba, they are not outsiders. They are just, their cousins that came from the countryside and had to come in very difficult conditions. Okay. Yet, for the state and for the authorities, they are not supposed to be there. And there is this invisibility created by the narrative of the state because there are relocation camps and welcoming camps in the countryside. Yeah. Where they are supposed to stay, but they choose by their agency not to stay there. They want to come to the city. Got it. So, and this is related also to a whole narrative and the practice of humanitarian aid, where the people in the city don't receive aid because they are not there or they are not supposed to be there. So they have this ambivalence of insider and outsider. Okay. But
Sylvia,
they
I'm going to hold you just to close with a sentence because I'm running out of time. So just to close your thought, please.
Okay. So they are in the city. They are referred to as the people who ran away from the conflict.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, Pankaj.
Yeah, actually, your both question complementary, and actually there is a problem with the number of the disabled person. Actually, two strange phenomena for the disabled person in our country. First, the number of the disabled person in our country is too less. And one of the approach paper published in the 11th 5-year plan, and they have to identify almost 6% population are the disabled. Basically, disabled person facing some social stigma, and they are not reporting for the population officer. That's actually a problem. Second thing about the problem about the disabled person's right and movement, that things not come from the down to top approach. Actually, top to down approach. Some people who have, and they have to start thinking about that. So on the basis of that results, actually, I have to just use the term pathological urbanization for the disabled person. And that's actually substantial structural populations and without the growth and without the concerning the disabled person. So that number, we have to look about the improving. But the problem with the how to capture the actual number. That's actually, so basically 2021 population, the disabled organization already identified the number of the disability included in the population census. I hope we are getting some actual numbers, so we can say that on basis of if that situation is improving or not.
Thanks, thanks a lot. Nishka?
So I completely agree that it's not a binary relationship, that it's either the protector or it's both. But in 12 minutes, it's a little difficult to actually explore the spectrum itself. But just to mention that when they say state, it's more of the local MLA. In their vision, especially because this is a Gujarati group, Modi ji speaking about actually recognizing Matani Pachedi, the cloth that a particular Wagri family makes, which is GI tag. That itself was recognition, and him making a call locally a few years back when he was the chief minister in Gujarat, that don't call yourself Wagris, call yourself Devi Pujaks. That is something that one of the people, Wagris, spoke about. So this complete him as this savior is something that they looked at. But simultaneously, when they speak about the local MLA, the local police, they are looking at them as harassers. And the claim that, in my limited understanding and in my limited space that I understood was, it is two claims that they were making. That the street is common. They kept on saying that they didn't understand what is property. That the phrase they used was Sabdharti Gopal ki. So they looked at it as common. So how are you differentiating between which is the similarity I looked at in Koliwadas, that it's an urban common, and the Wagris are looking at it as everything common. So mobility, the fact that someone is restricting their mobility, that itself becomes problematic for them. That this is a claim that I'm trying to make. And second was the relationship with the state. They spoke. One woman spoke about that we are the street of the eyes of the street, and how if there is something that happens, and because they make streets their homes as well, the first person the police comes to is to ask us, and we become the informants. And at the same time, this is the same regulator who removes us from the street. So this odd relationship that they continue to have. And the claim, I think, is, I don't think it's the claim to mobility only. They look at mobility as accessing space, and that they look at the city as a common. So that's why I think that's the claim they're trying to make.
Sure. Thanks. That's a lot. Priyanka, and we'll have to be a bit brief.
Gautam, I'll answer your question first. So, why they want to be treated differently from Gauthans and slum? So, the main reason behind this is to gain right over coastal commons and access to sea. Although they realize that fishing as an occupation is declining, there is still large number of population dependent on fishing, and they want to sustain it. During our field work, constantly we were given examples of Warsaw and Mahim and how the development has affected their fishing badly, because the kind of houses they are provided are not equipped to accommodate fishing. Like they say, we do not have space for repairing our nets. Where do we dry our fish? Why they are trying to negotiate with the state is that there is a strong sense that development is coming and it's inevitable. At least we'll try to make it on our own terms. So they use the word self-development. Again and again they'll tell, we are not against development, we also want developments. Our Koriwadas are cramped, we do not have proper water lines, electricity, etc. And in order to increase their bargaining power with the state, they are using indigeneity of their identity, asserting their indigenous nature, so that their bargaining power increases, so that when the development comes, they'll have better say in it.
Thank you very much. Is any response to Namrata's question or anyone on the group? Otherwise, I'll close, if we're okay. Yeah? Do you want to just, yeah? But very quickly, Neha, go ahead.
So Varvi, like I mentioned in my presentation as well, Varvi has been always confronting the state, be it in terms of coastal road, the span expansion, or the legal matters. And Now, what we are seeing is other Koriwadas are learning from their battles, be it on ground or the court cases. So that exchange is happening within Koriwadas, and that is why they are also being assertive about their comments, because they realize compensation is key, if key to having rights over commons and land. So that is one exchange is that is happening within Koriwadas, and yeah, the planning category is what we realized during our conversations on field is that people are aware that they can be Gauthan, but they don't want to be limited to Gauthan. They want to be identified as a fishing village because they want to continue fishing. Especially in case of Bhati, they are also talking about customary rights. So they realize Gauthan comes with limited protection, but what they are talking about is rights over sea and land. So that is why this category is different from what state and planning is already offering them. Yes, yeah.
Okay, we can
I
take
think
that
I've
offline.
answered.
Yeah, we can take
Yeah.
that offline because I have to close. Thank you very much, folks, for everyone on the panel. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much.